Good afternoon and happy Virgin Islands History Month. Today, we take a look into the life and legacy of Edward Wilmot Blyden, my great granduncle and also one of the most influential Pan-Africanists of the 19th century. From his early years growing up right here in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, to his monumental contributions on the continent of Africa, Blyden's story has been one of resilience, vision, and legacy. So come with me today as we jump right in.
Remember Queen Mary, we make the fire burn, and Edward Blyden with the Africa vision. Remember
Edward Wilmot Blyden was born right here on the island of St. Thomas on August 3rd, 1832. At that time, the island of St. Thomas was part of the Danish West Indies, and he was born to free Black parents at a time when not much Black people living in the Caribbean were actually free. They were actually slaves. As a child, he showed an incredible thirst for knowledge, excelling in language and literature. At about the age of 10, Edward Wilmot Blyden's father moved their family to go live in the country of Venezuela just for about 3 years. And at that time is when he actually learned to speak fluent Spanish. So upon moving back to the island of St. Thomas, Edward Wilmot Blyden actually attended the Dutch Reformed Church, which is located one block from the main street, downtown Main Street in Charlotte Amalia. And at this church, there was a reverend by the name of John P. Knox, who was the pastor there and basically took Edward Blyden underneath his wings. He noticed him and he also encouraged Blyden to get interested in the theological field. That's into becoming a pastor or a reverend such as he was. And so his early exposure to religious and classical education played a crucial role in shaping his worldview. So it was in 1850, at the age of 18 years old, Edward Wilmot Blyden, on the behest of the Reverend, decided to leave the Virgin Islands in hopes of pursuing higher education, more specifically in becoming a pastor. But he went to the United States and tried to enroll in 3 theological seminaries, or basically Bible colleges, to learn how to become a pastor. And because of his race, he was actually denied. Blyden didn't let that deter him, however. He also learned from the pastor that there was a new colony called Liberia that was formed on the western coast of Africa. And that colony was used for Blacks, freed Blacks who wanted to return to the African continent. And so, in hearing about that, Blyden was actually delighted and decided to move to Africa. So, in 1851, Blyden immigrated to Liberia, which, as I mentioned, was a nation founded by freed African Americans. There he found opportunities that he had been denied in the United States, and he quickly established himself as an intellectual and educator and became a professor of the classics at Liberia College by 1862. His mastery of languages such as Hebrew, Arabic, and Greek set him apart as a scholar of international reputation. He also took the time while in Africa to travel to the Middle East as well. And Blyden firmly believed that Africans and the people of African descent should embrace their heritage and build a strong, independent African civilization. This became the foundation of his philosophy, which later became known as Pan-Africanism. That basically is what led to him becoming, or him attaining the title of what we call the Father of Pan-Africanism. Blyden also had a political career and influence in Africa. Beyond academia, Blyden was deeply involved in politics and diplomacy. He served as Liberia's Secretary of State between the years 1864 and 1866. and later as a Minister of the Interior. He also worked in Sierra Leone, which is another colony founded by free slaves, and he promoted education and African self-reliance. His influence extended across West Africa, and he encouraged Black migration from the Caribbean and the US back to Africa. He firmly opposed European colonialism and missionary efforts that sought to erase African traditions. Instead, he advocated for the revival of indigenous African culture and identity. So, once again, Blyden basically strongly opposed colonialism. And that's what his movement of Pan-Africanism was about, because he strongly opposed the fact of how Christian missionaries were coming into the African continent and imposing their way of life upon Africans and encouraging Africans to drop their way and traditions of life that they have had for hundreds of years. Edward Wilmot Blyden was not just a statesman, he was also a prolific writer whose works laid the foundation of future Pan-Africanist thought. Some of his famous books include Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race, published in 1887, of which I remember my father actually having a copy and owning a copy too. I have to see myself if I could find a copy of that book again. If I could find a book, I would definitely give it a read and encourage you to read it also, because it is one of Edward Wilmot Blyden's more popular books that he wrote. Another notable book that he wrote and published in 1905 was West Africa Before Europe, a historical account challenging European narratives about Africa's past. I think this is so important in this day and age, especially when we have people in government going through websites right now and trying to erase true history. Anything that can be found about Black people in history, they're trying to erase that off of the internet. They're basically trying to scrub the internet of Black history. And what I'm talking to you about today is Black history. Once again, it's also Virgin Islands history, seeing that Edward Wilmot Blyden was born right here on the island of St. Thomas, trying to get history as it is erased from the history books. And that's something that we can't afford to do, because, as is said, if you don't know where you come from, then you wouldn't be able to know where you're going to. So another book that I like to mention that Edward Wilmot Blyden published in 1908 was African Life and Customs, a call for Africans to embrace indigenous traditions rather than adapting European customs. His writings inspired future African and Caribbean leaders, including the more widely known Marcus Garvey, of whom I was actually named after, Kwame Nkrumah, and W.E.B. Du Bois, of whom all played major roles in African liberation movements. Dr. Nkrumah was actually the person who led to Ghana receiving its independence and also became the first president of the country of Ghana when it was actually freed and they received their independence. I'd be remiss if I don't mention that Ghana was the first of all the African countries colonized by Europe to gain their independence. So once again, all these people, you may have heard of these people before, including, especially over here in the Western Hemisphere, Marcus Garvey, but you may not have known that they were heavily influenced by the writings and the philosophies of Edward Wilmot Blyden. In his later years, Blyden continued his advocacy for African empowerment. He settled in Sierra Leone, where he worked as a mentor, educator, and journalist. He passed away in Freetown on February 7, 1912, but his legacy lives on. Today, Edward Wilmot Blyden is remembered as the father of Pan-Africanism. His vision for African pride, unity, and self-determination remains influential, especially as African nations and the African diaspora continued their struggles for true independence and cultural identity. Also, if you are visiting and you're in the downtown Charlotte, Amali area, feel free to go visit the Dutch Reformed Church. If it is open on the day that you visit, there is a plaque at the right front end of the church when you walk in that is in memory of Edward Wilmot Blyden. That plaque, as you can see in this video, basically states the positions that he held, not only at the church, but in Liberia, where he served as the president of the college at Liberia, Secretary of State and Minister of the Interior, and also as a theologian and a scholar. In closing, I'd like to mention that from the beautiful shores of St. Thomas to the heart of West Africa, Edward Wilmot Blyden's journey was one of courage and conviction. His writings and philosophy continue to shape Black consciousness worldwide. If you do not or have not heard his name before, I hope you do know now. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more vlogs on history, culture, and travel. Until the next time, stay curious and keep exploring. And as I love to say, VI to the world.
That's why the place nice, so nice, so nice.